Universal salvation by deductive argument. The early church had a very well respected view, a doctrine called the apokatastasis, that held that ultimately God is going to be all in all, and that Christ is going to bring all his enemies to his feet. And as a result, all people are going to be ultimately reconciled with God. The apokatastasis means the restoration of all things by God to what he created it to be. This doctrine, called the apokatastasis, universal salvation as we call it today, was so highly respected by the early church fathers. Not only did they not consider it to be a heresy, they considered it to be the orthodox view of Christianity. The idea that Christ is completely victorious, 100% victorious, the total victory of Christ, as I call it. Notable church fathers such as Gregory of Nyssa in the 4th century and especially Origen in the 2nd century had expounded this doctrine to a very high level, backing it up with scripture, and they also used philosophical arguments to show that it must be in scripture. And that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to show you a couple philosophical deductive arguments, and I'm going to use the form modus ponens to show why universalism, or the apokatastasis as they called it, must be in scripture. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with modus ponens, let me give you a very transparent example of modus ponens. I could say 1, all golden retrievers are dogs. 2, Bingo is a golden retriever. Conclusion: therefore, Bingo must be a dog. Now notice that the conclusion is dependent on the truth of the first two premises. If some golden retrievers are cats, then the conclusion is in doubt. If Bingo isn't a golden retriever, the conclusion is in doubt. But if the premises are true, the conclusion follows with logical necessity and is sure as a mathematical proof. So here are 3 deductive arguments for your consideration supporting the doctrine of universal salvation. 1. If God is all-powerful, then he can save all people. 2. God is all-powerful. Therefore, God can save all people. Okay, so the first premise there is mostly uncontroversial. The pushback comes when people claim that God is constrained by the free will of mankind. And I will argue back to you that if God is constrained by the free will of mankind, if his plan of salvation cannot work within those parameters, then he is not all-powerful. Therefore, for you to deny the conclusion of this syllogism that God can save all people, you have to deny that God is all-powerful. Argument number 2. If God is all-loving, he would save all people if he can. 2. God is all-loving. Therefore, God will save all people if he can. Now, I have a truckload of scripture that supports that God is both all-powerful and all-loving. And therefore, the conclusion of these 2 syllogisms must be true, logically and necessarily true. So I can take these 2 syllogisms and now combine them into a single syllogism. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, he can and will save all people. 2. God is all-powerful and all-loving. Conclusion: God can and will save all people. Therefore, this conclusion that God can and will save all people is a logical necessity. To deny it is to embrace an incoherent view of Scripture and an incoherent view of who God is. Therefore, when we're interpreting passages such as the furnace of fire and the lake of fire, we must interpret them within the framework of a logically coherent view of God. And if that framework contradicts who God is, if your interpretation of these passages contradicts who God is, your interpretation must be false. Not only is your interpretation false, it is logically and necessarily false. If your English translation of the Bible or other language says things like punishment is for eternity or forever and ever, then those translations are logically and necessarily false. And you need to go back and look at the original Greek and see if that word forever or eternity is actually in there. And what you're going to find out is it's not. Now, if you're new to the doctrine of universal salvation, which was called the apokatastasis by the early church fathers, please subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be bringing you much more. And if you haven't seen some of my other work at this channel, please go and watch that. I defend this view right out of Scripture, and you will find that it is a very well supported and easily defended doctrine. My mission here at the Total Victory of Christ channel is to share the unfailing love of God for all people, and I hope that'll be your mission as well. Thank you for listening. God bless you. Bye-bye.